The Harvard Business School had this statistic going that 65% of startups failing are due to a conflict between co-founders. So it's real, and the business is at risk. And the founders are in a really miserable place. Like mental health is really down. They can't sleep. They're worried. They're worried about the business. They're worried about the relationship.
What are the typical areas that you find founders are having conflict in, and how do they arise?
A breakdown of communication. Getting into that loop of trying to solve a problem together, but actually getting into what I call the blaming game.
Welcome, Delphine.
Hello.
I'm so glad that you're here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So today we are talking co-founder relationships and co-founder conflict. Let's start by getting into your background first. Would you be able to share just a little bit about your background?
Sure. So very quickly, you will hear that I've got an accent. So I'm French from Paris. I moved to London in 2002. And my career has been in brand and marketing in the corporate world. And a few years ago, I took the leap and set up as an independent coach. I qualified as an executive coach, started my business, was working with business founders. And I knew I had to niche a bit more. I was not sure who to niche for exactly. And I had this experience with two business ladies, two co-founders who wanted to work on their vision, on their brand, on their marketing. And I think that's when it hit me that there is a whole world in the co-founders world which is not necessarily talked about. And since then, I decided to go all in. And the last 2 years, I've been mainly working with co-founders.
Okay, that's amazing. I can't wait to get into more about this. I went to an event that was held at Google, and on the panel, there are four founders, and two of them mentioned that they had a therapist,
Uh-huh.
so a co founder therapist. So they literally had coaching just to work on their relationship, which I find really intriguing. So let's dive in to talking more about this. So, what are the typical areas that you find founders are having conflict in, and how do they arise?
Yeah, it can arise from so many places actually, but usually the first symptom is when it starts to be a breakdown of communication. So I think communication is one of the biggest foundation for any type of partnership. And when things start to get difficult, they may not even know exactly why, but that starts to translate into the way they communicate. Because what happens is there's so much emotion coming into play, it's impacting their behavior, and they sort of avoid each other. So to give you an example, I've just worked recently with two co-founders, and they were really getting into more and more tensions, and that came from decision making. So that came from a decision that one of them made about the business. And she said she wanted to involve her partner, but her partner didn't really make space to talk thoroughly about this decision. And in a sense, she disagreed with the decision. So she found it quite difficult to stop it. But seeing her business partner going and implementing whatever she wanted to do made her feel not heard. And that started to fuel the problem because she felt unheard. And so she wanted to find ways to stop what was happening. And the more she was trying to stop it, the more her co founder wanted to continue whatever she was doing and stopped including her. So they were getting into that loop of trying to solve a problem together, but actually getting into what I call the blaming game. They were just going into that circle of, you did that without my involvement, without my approval. And then the other one saying, you are stopping everything I'm doing. So I'm just going to do it still to make the business fly. It was a very tense situation. There was a big breakdown of communication. They found it very hard to talk. And in the end, the few times they were talking on Zoom, because they were living in different countries, they always end up arguing. They always end up having a fallout. And It's interesting because there's a lot of things which come into play in that type of scenario. One is communication styles. So we talked how important communication is. One thing which was very strong with them is one of them is more an extrovert, more of a talker. She would talk through problems. She's very like lively, sharing things about her life. The other one is more of an introvert, much more into the logic, into the details. Like she would be amazing at implementing any new ideas. But her preferred way of communicating is writing. So she prefers sending emails rather than pick up the phone and talk to a co-founder. But the other one, her preferred way of communicating is talking. So that started to become a big problem when they had this tension because they were trying to force their way of communicating to the other. That didn't always go really well. And another thing which was interesting is by working through their challenges, what came up, and I've seen it with other co-founders before, what came up is things which were from their past relationships. So before they became co-founders, they were colleagues, and one of them was a boss, and the other one was her employee, was reporting to her. And some of the dysfunction in their co-founders relationship come from those times that they had this dynamic, and one was setting the way, the other one was following, and it created a dysfunction because the one who was reporting to the other felt all the time in the partnership, in the 5 years they've been working together, she always felt, I need to be heard, I need to be equal, I need to be a leader. But found it actually quite difficult to do that because she was stuck into that dynamic of almost reporting still to this person. I've seen it as well with friends going into business. Often we go with who? Your friend, your ex-colleague, possibly your partner, your sibling. There's always a moment where there is a need to think about how do we transition that relationship properly. If we're friends, how can we make sure that now we are becoming co-leaders of our business? Because a lot of people tell me, I don't want to tell my co-founders this. I don't want to compromise our friendship. And what that makes is it's prevent them from having really hard conversations. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to go into a little bit more about that kind of relationship and how you can protect it a bit later.
Yeah.
So you described a situation where there was a problem with communication. Do you see other types of dynamics playing out when it comes to dysfunction in the co-founder relationship?
Yeah, definitely. Communication is one. It's obviously it's almost like the bone of everything, really. The big area is the roles and responsibilities not clearly defined. And it's amazing because it happens actually a lot. And when we work in an organization, it's not always clear, but usually you do have a job description and you know how you fit within the organization. A lot of co-founders go in, and I know you work, Barisha, with a lot of tech companies. So, for example, you would have the tech experts, and then you may have the commercial experts. So it could be natural to say, okay, you're doing tech and I do the commercial. But actually, there's a lot of blurred areas here because everything is interconnected. So when there's no clear roles and responsibilities, that can create a lot of confusion. That also impacts the other area, which is how do we take decisions? Another area where there's a lot of faith in terms of let's trust the process, we take decision together when we need. But actually what happened with the example I just gave before is because it didn't have any clear decision-making process, what happened is one went on with her idea and the other one felt that she didn't have a say. When if they had discussed before about, okay, how do we make sure that we take those decisions together? What do you do? What do I do? What do you decide? What do I decide? What do we decide together? How do we decide together? How do we decide on investments? What do we look at? All those things. It's amazing how many co-founders don't actually look at that properly.
As a small team, you have to take on multiple roles. So, for example, you might not have an accountant or a HR function, and somebody in the team will need to be responsible for that. How do you go about finding those grey areas and figuring out that situation? Is there a framework that you can follow to figure out what everyone's role is?
It's not realistic to think you can just clarify everything in the early days. I think the key is to have a first conversation to look at who is doing what. And the framework I would use is actually, it's simply understanding who is naturally doing what, but then also looking at the areas of development they want to do. So if someone wants to do more public speaking as a challenge, he may say, listen, I would like to be involved in the business development in that side. I would like to go into conferences and I would like to do a few talks because it's really good for me. I want to learn that side. But then continually reviewing, so every month or every quarter, looking at the business and what's been working well, who's been doing what, is there any other way we can organize the way we work? So I think the key is to talk about it at the beginning and on an ongoing way, keep talking about it. I think business development is a very good example. Like co-founders, above all in the first couple of years, they know they need to do business development. Do they work on a strategy together and then specifically say, you're doing this, I do that? No, they don't. Some do, but many don't. And what can happen then is one may start to fear he does more than the other one, which then start to create a bit of friction or tension. And business development, it can also be not being aligned. If you say we need to find clients, but you don't define exactly how you're going to do that, can mean that they're going to go in different direction. Maybe one will be all over social media creating content. Maybe the other one will do some networking. And in itself, it's fine. It's good to do all those things, but it could be quite disjointed if they don't talk about that.
Yeah, so it's important to, I suppose, be aligned on the activities and go into a little bit more detail than you usually might.
Yeah, definitely be aligned. The alignment is really important. And the two co-founders I worked with who instilled in me that passion to work with co-founders, when we started working, they told me, oh, we've got the same vision, we aligned. I said, okay, fine. When I work with my clients, I work with them on a one-to-one basis, like individually and then jointly. So I do both one-to-one and joint session in a program. And by talking to them individually, I realized they had very different visions. One was really ambitious. She wanted to grow the business. She wanted more clients. She was already thinking about getting associates on board. The other one came from corporate. She was exhausted. She wanted more of a lifestyle business. She didn't want to work all the hours. So they actually had different personal aspiration. They also had different situation. The one who wanted to work not flat out, she was married, someone, her partner had a stable income, whereas her partner, her co-founder, was single. All the responsibility of earning money on her, all of that came into play. So when they told me they had the same vision, they actually had very different personal visions and they had a vague vision of where to take the business, but it was so vague that it couldn't really drive them forward. So that's all the things that we worked on.
I think that it's interesting that to see the situation where you think you're actually aligned and you're not. And
Yeah.
I think it probably comes from a lot of assumptions that are made on both sides. It was like what you don't say and just assume.
And we're back to communication because
Mm.
it's exactly that. It's all the thing we assume that the other one is thinking or doing. And another really eye-opening exercise I've done with those two ladies who had different personal vision is we worked on their brands, and part of that work, we worked on their values. And the starting point was their personal values. And I was amazed when they did the activity on their own. They had very similar values in theory. So then we looked at those core values they both had to see what they meant for the business. And we've realized through the discussion that they had very different interpretation of those values. So even though they had the same values, it didn't mean the same for both of them. And it's only through those discussions that we had that they could really go deep in terms of what that value means for them and for the business. And they could find alignment. And that was so interesting because I didn't suspect before that if people have similar values, that's it, they have similar values, but you need to talk and talk and talk through them and go quite deep to really understand what does this mean for our business? What does this mean for who we want to be as business owners? How do we want to show up for our clients? So that was a really interesting exercise. And when I work with clients, I always encourage them to work on values anyway, because that is such an important part of what's really important to us and what's important to the business. It's a key part of driving a business forward, I believe.
Yeah, and important to get right at the beginning because as you're building, you'll both be tugging at different areas and trying to shape the business into something different.
Yeah.
So, what do you do when co founders disagree on the vision or values?
Yeah. What I do a lot in the first session I work with them is first to help them to listen to each other again. And a lot of people joke when I tell them what I do, saying, "Oh, you're doing like couple therapy." And I always say, "No, I don't do couple therapy. It's like the business is very much at the heart of it." However, it's true that there is a moment when things get complicated between them. They just don't hear each other. So they are full of filters, and whatever is said is going through all those filters. And it makes it very hard then to really listen to what the other one is doing. So when they disagree, and if they are in that place of tension, it's trying to first, it's not removing the tension, but it's working through the emotions. So what's happening for each of them so they can process the emotions. And then it's going into what is the other one is saying. I had a face-to-face session recently, and I spent half an hour, like we spent a lot of 3 hours in together, but there was half an hour where I was asking them to tell me what they heard from the other one. And it was so fascinating, Varisha, because they were not hearing each other. So one would say, blah, 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 like expressing something really important to them. Then I would ask the other one, what did you hear? And the person would say, I heard that. I was like, okay, can I say that's not what I heard? I heard something really different here. And I've asked them a couple of times to do that. And both, they had exactly the same. Both were so full of judgments and filters in terms of how they were taking the information that they were like, I just heard that she just doesn't want, or back into that blame, back into that
Mhm.
blaming place. When actually they were expressing their needs underneath the emotion. So I had anger on one side and I had fear on the other side. So very strong emotion. Under the emotion, there were needs, very specific needs. But the emotion was so strong, they just couldn't hear each other. They couldn't hear it. So what I do with them is process the emotion and then really listen and really hear what the other is saying. Once they manage to do that, and once they manage to understand each other's triggers, each other's needs, that's when they can start to reconnect. And then we can get into those discussions about, as you said, the vision, the priorities, and looking at how do you disagree? Because disagreement is a funny one. A lot of people are scared of disagreement, above all in the UK. I'm French, the French are very direct. So we're usually not too worried about disagreements. But still, for many people, it can be quite difficult to confront someone because we are very worried, or humans are very worried about conflicts. But actually, sometimes you need to get into a disagreement, and co-founders need to debate. And I think that's what I've seen. Sometimes they go from agreeing on a vision or agreeing on a direction together, and then they go straight into because one says something, the other one wants the opposite, and they forget that middle place, which is creating a space for debate, creating a space where I can challenge what you're saying, but I want to hear your perspective. What are the pros, what are the cons, and what are the options. I think when they go into tension, there's no more debate. It becomes ego driven. And that's where emotion, ego stop from really listening to what the partner is saying.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely resonate with this because working in tech and working in cross-functional teams, it's very collaborative. There's a need to have a space to share different opinions and different perspectives and different ideas. And I have experienced times when there's somebody very strong on the team that doesn't
Yeah.
like back down at all. And we end up having these like long drawn out meetings. It's so tiring and exhausting.
Yes.
So how do you do this in a healthy way? Because you mentioned the moment you move from debate into tension is not going to get you to your goal. And like you mentioned, like with the ego coming in, the relationships can be broken, right? First of all, I suppose the question would be, how do you know when you're going from a debate, healthy debate, into that tension zone? And second of all, how do you avoid getting into that tension?
Yeah. How do you know? I think, to be honest, most of the clients who come to me, they're already in that tense bubble. There's no more debate because of what I just explained. But one thing I do when I start working with them is to help them understand their communication style and preference. I trained as everything disc, how do you say, everything disc practitioner. So DISC it's a profiling tool. It's a cousin of Insights, Insight Discovery with the colors.
Yeah.
It's very similar. And I love using that tool because it just helps to understand, like you were talking about a strong character. So a very strong character in a team or in a partnership would be a dominant character. So the D for this would be dominant. So very strong, verbal, extrovert, needs to go quite fast paced, and can almost be quite forceful, pushing opinion on others. And on the opposite of the spectrum, you would have the S for steady or steadiness. So the S character is someone who is more into relationship, who needs his harmony, and who wants to do things well, but like to do things together. It's also a character who needs a bit of time to process information, doesn't take quick decision, need a bit of time to then think about different options. So completely opposite of the red, who's talk, decision, now, let's do it. The great thing with DISC is it's quite a tangible tool to use with clients. So they would do an online test and then they would receive a personalized report. It's fantastic for self-awareness because we know ourselves, but it's just good to see it in the profile, where we see it, why we behave in a certain way, what is our need, what's the needs we have. And then in the context of co-founders, having the same for your co-founder, like the two person I mentioned that I met face to face, one is a D, the other one is an S, so that's extreme opposites. And they found it really interesting to have their reports, and they could see where some of the problem was coming from. Is that they had very different needs. Again, one fast paced, the other one needs more time. One very dominant, the other one much more collaborative. So that helped to have very good discussion about what does it mean for their collaboration. And they now want to do it as well with the rest of their team. So they have
Mm.
2 employees and they want to do it with the rest of the team to see where is everyone sitting.
That's so interesting. So
Mm.
I've done one of these personality tests at work. And what I found is that when you understand somebody's personality type, you stop taking things personally because you understand that somebody is wired a certain way, you understand them to a deeper level. So
Yeah.
you stop taking things so personally, you stop processing the external actions that they're taking, you stop seeing them as directed towards you because you know the deeper meaning behind what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly that. It's stop taking things personally because we have a tendency to want people to function the way we do. I common phrase. I don't understand why he's like this, why she did that. We say that all the time. But actually, when we give advice to people, do this or do that, it's based on who we are and our preferred way of doing things. So this help to really put yourself into the shoes of the other person with an aim to improve communication, understanding, and collaboration. And I've seen it with those two. The dominant character now, he can see that his co founder, she doesn't work at the same pace as him. It doesn't mean that she doesn't work fast. It's just she doesn't work in the same way. And he's much more understanding of that.
Mm.
Similarly, for her, she can see what's happening for him and she can see that he needs to these things he needs to do quickly. So instead of getting frustrated, she would understand better. So it's not about one or the other co-founder to adapt to the other. It's about them finding a middle ground. That's what's really important.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. For co founders that are listening today, some of them might have a situation or some tension bubbling away, others might not. If one of the co founders wants to get co founder therapy, would they convince the other co founder to go forward with this?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's a challenging one because you can't force anyone to do it. But I think what I've seen with the clients I work with has always been a leader in terms of someone who took the initiative to contact me and then as a co-founder. Most of the time, the co-founder may be a little bit skeptical at the beginning, but they acknowledge that there was a problem and they wanted to improve it. It can be hard to bring up when the communication is already strained because then it's adding another layer. But I think there's just one way, which is to mention it, to raise it, and to explain actually that there is something in this partnership which is not working, which is impacting the person and impacting the business. I think what I've seen a lot is when conflict comes, it puts the business at risk. And I know that the business Harvard School had this statistic going that 65% of startups failing are due to a conflict between co-founders. So it's real. And the business is at risk. And the founders are in a really miserable place. Like mental health is really down. They can't sleep. They're worried. They're worried about the business. They're worried about the relationship. In my 18 years of being employed, all the time when I felt really stressed was when I had problem with my boss or with colleagues, when I had relationship problems. But then you're part of a system. You're in a big organization and you have HR and what's here is just the two of you. You don't have anyone to help you with that. So it can really impact you. It can really impact your mental health. So bringing it up and explaining the impact that dysfunction is having. I think when you talk about relationships, they're like, no, I don't want any help with my relationship. However, talk more about it as a dysfunction in your partnership. And I love helping my clients to go from this challenging place to become a high performing team. And sometimes you don't need to be in conflict to still work on your partnership. I had a lot of team coaching when I was back in corporate where we're like, okay, we're going to help you to work even better together. we didn't have any conflict, but we were not maybe working in the most optimized way. So I think instead of going into the touchy feeling of relationship is not working well, we don't maybe talk more about the business. What's the impact on the business? Still talk about the impact it has on you, but often that's where the other sides start to see it.
How open should co-founders be with each other when it comes to sharing their personal lives and the things that are going on? Because I can imagine
Mm.
if you the more you know, the more understanding you can be.
Yeah.
Does it help the relationship if they are a bit more open about sharing personal lives?
So that is a very interesting question. And I don't have a straightforward answer because it's very much due to everyone's preference. And I think the key lies in what's your needs and what your partner needs. I had two clients. One was really private and she didn't want to share all her life. And she found that when her business partner was sharing all her life was too much.
Mm.
So in that case, I think it's important to actually understand, again, meet in the middle. If one person is really private and actually want to co-founder someone they can get on with, but don't necessarily want to share all their life, and the other one like to share a lot, it's another awareness thing. It starts with being aware. What do you need? What do I need? Okay, where do we meet? Because you're right. When you can communicate on a personal level, that's when you build trust. And if things happen, that's when you can be like, oh, okay, but I know why that's happening. So it does help when co-founders have a personal relationship, I find, to build trust and to bring support when they need to be supported. It also helps when they're stressed. We all have different reaction on the stress. So I've seen someone becoming like a helicopter person, needing to do a lot and wanted to double check everything, wanted to running in all sort of direction. Once you understand those stress triggers and because you understand the person, it's easier to manage. So I think it's really understanding each other and again talk about it. And that's what I can help them to talk about because it's not natural to talk about that. It's not natural to say, okay, by the way, we're building this business together. By the way, how much personal stuff do you want to share? You don't do that. You just either talk or you don't talk. It did come up quite a few times in my with my client work. I had the other example I have was one of the co-founders decided to move to New York. And she had very good reason to do that. But her co-founder didn't understand them because he didn't have this personal connection. And that is when it becomes a problem because he saw it as a threat to the business when it was for her an important move. She doesn't need to share all her life with him, but if you can share the important bits, it really helps building trust and it really helps the relationship. Now, some co-founders are really close friends and we share absolutely everything, and some others don't. So everyone is different, but understand where you put the cursor really would be my big advice.
Mm. So earlier you mentioned how co-founders can be siblings, they can be couples, they can be family members, they might even be long-term friends. How does a co-founder couple like this go about building a business together and protect that relationship? Because some of these relationships are quite sacred. They might be married couples or like couples that have been together for ages. So how do you
Yeah,
protect that relationship without letting the tension
yeah,
get in the way?
yeah, absolutely. It's a big topic and it's interesting actually. I also have a podcast, the Co-Founders Show, and I've done 2 seasons interviewing co-founders about their journey and when they managed to make it work. And there was the second season is all about family-run businesses, siblings and husband and wives, and it can be tricky because there's already so much at stake. And then you also have this relationship if it's sort of falls out, it has big impacts on your family. That's a real question. And I think I mentioned it before. For me, the key is communication in how you transition that relationship. So if you were friends and decide to build a business together, you definitely want to keep your friendship. And I hear it all the time. Our friendship is more important than the business. So if things get too heavy, I would certainly choose our friendship over the business. And that is a very honorable thing to do. It's a good thing to do, but it can create a lot of problem in itself, because if you want to protect your friendship, then you don't necessarily tell each other the truth. When you disagree, you may worry to go into a stronger disagreement. So transitioning your relationship properly is about talking about, okay, we're going from friends to being co-founders. What does it mean to be co-founders? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for our friendship? What do we need to do differently? How do we need to behave differently with each other when we are working? It's almost setting up like guidelines for our partnership. How do we make sure we have a space where we can share things, where we can tell things to each other, even if it's uncomfortable? In one of the interviews for the podcast, one of the guys said they live in different countries as well. And he said, I never leave any even small bubble of tension stay in the relationship. If something is bothering me, even a tiny bit, I would always pick up the phone and say, hey, just can we just talk about this again? And I find it so happy, like so interesting, because most of the time what we do is we keep it for ourselves and it's too small to be brought up. So we just keep it. And
Yeah, like water under the bridge.
and then it
You're just
grows, and then it happens again, and then it's built into resentment. So I think it's talking about this. If you were colleagues, were you in the same team? Was one of you managing the other? Now you're becoming leaders. And for me, finding your place as a leader is really important. You're not friends anymore. Yes, you are friends, but you're more than friends now. You are co-leaders. You are co-leaders of that business. How do you transition that relationship? How do you want to work together? How do you draw to the trust of your friendship to do that? How do you create boundaries as well? Like for couples, it's a big thing. Couples who work together, a big thing is not talking about business when they fall asleep in the evening, or at dinner when they're with the kids, or when they go on holiday. How do you do that? As a founder, you think about work all the time. So creating those healthy boundaries, and again, they're very different for all. So I don't want to say to people, do this and do that. No, find your way, find your own boundaries, but it's all in that communication. So I would say three questions. One is, how do we want to work together now? How do we use our previous relationship to strengthen our existing relationship? And what type of leaders do we want to be? Who are you as a leader? Who am I as a leader? What does it mean for our business? Are the three questions. And find a space where you can say things. That's the most important.
great. Thank you for that. So my final question is, what does a healthy co-founder relationship look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's got a few things. When communication is easy, and from the interviews I've done for my podcast, it was so interesting. I think what I realized is the relationship which works the best are amongst people who done a lot of personal development on their own in their own time. People who know it, who knows themselves quite well, and then who knows how to handle the relationship. So and I think there is a misconception, a misconception that once you have your co-founder, that's it, that's your support. When actually you still need to do a lot of work on yourself. You still need to work on your mindset. Still need to do that work. So people who know themselves, who understand each other's triggers, and who have a healthy communication. So who can say things to each other and who have, I don't know, I don't want to call it a process because, again, you don't need a communication process to be able to communicate properly. But some people like to talk once a week and have a meeting at the end of the week where they can share the wins and the changes of the week. Some people just WhatsApp all day long and don't really need to talk. So again, you need to find your own way. But for me, all those things I've been describing, they all sit on one big rock, and that is trust. How do you build trust? We would need a whole episode on this. Again, it's very specific to individuals, but trust is a rock of any solid foundation. As soon as trust starts to be compromised, that's when things get really difficult. And out of the co-founders I've been working with, the one who decided to separate are the one who didn't manage to restore that trust. So I think nurturing that trust and building on that, having a positive intent for your co-founder action is one way. If you always assume that there is a positive intent happening on the other side and they are not doing something to really annoy you or to take the business in the wrong direction, it helps to maintain that connection and maintain that trust. Obviously, if your co-founder is doing something really illegal or not, of course, then trust is broken and then you need to take action. But often, I've seen a lot of people losing trust and faith in their co-founder when actually it was just a big misunderstanding. It was nothing bad which happened. It was just different ways of seeing the world, different perspectives, and lack of communication. So that's really why I'm so passionate about, because I think by helping people to reconnect and couldn't communicate, understand each other, understand themselves, it can really help them to reconnect on the trust basis. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, we've talked about a lot, so I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to take away. I've got a few questions just to end the session on a light note. So my first question is, what resource could you recommend to our audience that might help them?
I do have a book which I've been reading recently. I don't know if you see the culture map. So that has nothing to do with co-founders or partnership. But I love that book. It's a culture map from Erin Meyer because she talks about cultural differences and how different culture adopt different leadership styles and how that can create tension in the context of globalization and how to understand each other better. So there is a bit of a correlation with what I do. And I think the reason why I love this topic is I'm myself French, living in the UK. My husband is German. We live in a very multicultural environment. And funnily enough, I attract a lot of international customers. So they may be based in the UK, but they very often have different nationalities. And when I work through their issues and interpersonal tensions, it can come up that cultural differences come into play. So if you're into how to understand different culture, how to understand different leadership styles, why would the American work this way when the French work that way? I would really recommend that book. I found it really fascinating.
Yeah. Sounds important for anyone, really.
Yeah.
Not just co-founder relationships, but also if you're building a team, I
Yes.
think that's really important. Or if you're managing people from different cultures
Yes.
other than your own, that's important. Because yeah, I can definitely resonate with that being a British Indian person
Yeah.
working in London, for sure.
Yeah, and I think big organization now they're becoming more and more global. And then all of a sudden you're like, you're head of IT, go to Russia, maybe not at the moment, go to Russia and lead a team. And the book talks about how the Russian are very hierarchical style in terms of they want a leader who tell them what to do,
Mm.
basically. While in the UK, for example, it's a bit more free is not the word, but it's not hierarchical. It's more based on trust. So I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you where we want to get to, but then I'm gonna work with you, but trust you that you're gonna find a way to get there. The French, for example, are very hierarchical. So it's something I've struggled with a bit actually. Reporting to someone who's gonna be in my eyes, macromanaging me because they're going to tell me where to go, how to get there, which tools to use to get there, which car to drive to get there. They're just going to give me all the detail. And then I'm like, I'm suffocating. So I found the UK actually much more opened in that sense. But by reading the book, you understand so much if you work with Americans, if you work with Latin America, how that's impacting. So yeah, a good read.
Amazing. Next question. If you had one wish, what would that be?
Yeah, it's probably going to be a bit utopic, but the reason why I got into what I do now is I really believe if people understood each other better, the world would be in a better place. So I think for me, the wish is for people to be much more understanding of themselves and of others so they can build better. I think whatever happened in the world or in organization is conflict or it can be war, it can be it's based on those differences of opinion and perspectives and values and all of that. And if you can just understand better with less judgment, I think we would have a better planet, we would have a better world, we would create better businesses. So yeah, it's a big wish, I realize.
Oh, I was just imagining what the world would be like.
A good place.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
What one piece of advice have you been given that served you well?
So I've got this discussion a lot with my son at the moment. My son is 14, so he's like in these teenage years, trying to find his way in the world. And I I think it's so easy to get caught in our life actually, and to be on a boat and on a flow. It's very hard to get off the flow of life. Above all, when you're grown up like we are, and you have responsibilities, and maybe we have kids, maybe we have a mortgage, and there's so much risk and fear associated to that. So I think for me, the biggest advice was actually, it's going to sound so cliche, but follow your heart. That's an advice I give to myself. Don't let anyone else tell you what you can and can't do. I think at some point I felt a bit refrained in the corporate world. There's more I wanted to do, but more in corporate means progression, going up the career ladder. And it was not that. I think connect to your guts and follow it. And I had this discussion with my son who had to decide on a few topics for next year. And he told me one day, and made me really pleased. He said, I decided to go with that topic, even though I don't have the best mark in there. But you always said that I should do what I love. So I decided to take this over something else. And I was like, yes, that's good.
Mhm.
Because you may not have great marks at the moment, but you love it and you're going to enjoy it. And that's going to help you to get better at it. Yeah.
Amazing.
I hope that
Thank
answers your
you.
question.
Yes, it does. It definitely does. Before we leave, how can people connect with you after this podcast?
Sure. The best is really on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. And
We can share
then,
your link.
yeah. And the podcast, which is on my LinkedIn profile. The link is on my LinkedIn profile. So the co-founders show is on all the platforms, podcast platform out there. But LinkedIn is the best way to connect, have a little chat, and I try to create regular content, not really to give advice, but just to bring value, to raise awareness about topics on the co-founders relationship, what to watch out, what to think about, we may not think about straight away. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Delphine. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you so much, Bavisha. I really enjoyed talking with you.